What if your goodness is the very thing that's destroying you? You've been taught to be kind, to be quiet, to take the high road. But every time you bite your tongue when your soul wants to scream, you don't grow. You shrink. You tell yourself it's wisdom, maturity. But deep down, you feel it. That tension in your chest, that burning behind your silence, that shame after letting it slide again. That's not peace. That's surrender. Nietzsche didn't write to make us feel good. He wrote to expose the rot. His words were not comfort. They were a hammer. And if you let them, they will break the chains you didn't know were there. Chains forged by a morality that rewards submission and punishes authenticity. This video isn't self-help. It's a wake-up call. We'll dive deep into Nietzsche's most dangerous ideas: slave morality, resentment, the will to power, and the spiritual transformation required to become who you are. But be warned, the truths here are not soft. They are not safe. If you stay, you won't be the same. How many times have you thought, it's not worth the fight? You told yourself you were being mature, civil, wise. You walked away. You bit your tongue. You smiled politely while something inside you clenched. We live in a culture that rewards this. From the earliest years, we are trained to value peace over truth, quiet over authenticity. Don't make a scene. Let it go. Just be the bigger person. It sounds noble, doesn't it? But it isn't. What looks like maturity is often just fear dressed up in virtue. Every time you silence yourself to avoid conflict, you're not being elevated. You're eroding. You're not rising above. You're disappearing. That nod you give, that fake smile, that breath you hold when something unjust happens. That isn't diplomacy. It's self-abandonment. You think you're avoiding damage, but what you're really doing is training yourself to become invisible. And make no mistake, the world notices. Those who act in bad faith, they recognize when someone fears confrontation, and they exploit it. Again and again. Nietzsche looked at this social costume and tore it off. He saw politeness, meekness, and passive tolerance not as virtues, but as weapons forged by the weak to protect themselves from the strong. This wasn't about goodness. It was about survival. He called it slave morality, a value system created not by the powerful, but by those who could not act, who had no voice, who needed to justify their impotence by redefining it as humility. They flipped the script. Strength became evil. Obedience became virtue. And we inherited this poisoned legacy as moral truth. And now, here you are, repeating that cycle, thinking your silence is wisdom. That being kind means being quiet. That being moral means being harmless. But deep down, you feel it. That quiet bitterness. That growing discomfort. That shame after every moment you failed to speak up. That is your soul knocking, begging to be heard. Nietzsche's voice is the hammer. And your fear of conflict? That is the lock on the door of your authenticity. The question is simple and terrifying. How many more moments will you allow to pass in silence before you admit the truth? That your politeness has become your prison? To understand your fear of conflict, you have to go deeper than your personal story. This isn't just about your upbringing or your social circle. This is about history, morality, power. Centuries ago, when strength ruled openly and the will to dominate shaped empires, there were those who thrived in that world: warriors, nobles, conquerors. They didn't apologize for their ambition. They didn't ask for permission to assert themselves. Their idea of good was simple: whatever affirmed life, power, and self-expression. They were creators of values, not followers. But not everyone could live that way. There were the others, the defeated, the weak, the oppressed. They couldn't conquer. They couldn't win. So what did they do? They changed the rules. They inverted the moral code. They said, pride is a sin, power is evil, submission is virtue. And just like that, a new morality was born, one that Nietzsche called slave morality. It wasn't born from strength, but from bitterness, not from freedom, but from resentment. It was a defense mechanism, a way for the powerless to cope with their reality by pretending they were better than the strong. And here's the most disturbing part. That morality is still alive in you today. It's in every moment you bite your tongue, in every time you apologize for taking up space, in every instinct that says, don't confront, just adapt. You've inherited a system of values built by those who were afraid to fight, and you carry it like it's your own. But it isn't. It's not a reflection of your heart. It's a legacy of fear. And until you see that clearly, you'll keep mistaking submission for goodness and silence for virtue. Nietzsche didn't condemn weakness. He condemned the lie that weakness is somehow more moral than strength. He saw through the illusion. The slave morality you live by isn't about peace. It's about control. It exists to suppress your will, to make you manageable, harmless, small. And you've accepted it because it came wrapped in words like kindness, humility, compassion. But at its root, it's just fear with a halo. The real question now isn't whether you've been trained to obey. You have. The question is, will you keep obeying, or will you finally start unlearning? If this message resonates with you, hit the subscribe button and join the channel. Thank you for being here. There's a toxic fire that burns beneath silence. You might think you're at peace when you avoid confrontation, but you're not. You're fermenting. That weight in your chest after someone disrespects you, that mental replay of what you should have said hours later, that sharp bitterness towards someone who seems to walk over you without consequence. That's not self-control. That's resentment. And Nietzsche warned us, resentment isn't just a passing emotion. It's a moral cancer, a slow, corrosive poison that eats away at your soul. Resentment begins when your natural impulse to assert yourself is blocked. You want to speak, to act, to defend, but fear stops you. You suppress the energy, but it doesn't vanish. It turns inward, curdling into narratives. I'm better than them because I don't lash out. I'm above this. They'll see one day. These thoughts feel righteous, even virtuous, but they are lies. They are armor for the powerless, stories you tell yourself to hide the fact that you feel trapped, voiceless, small. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He knew that the most dangerous people are not the aggressive, they are the resentful, because the resentful smile while they bleed. They pretend to be saints while internally screaming, and the longer they avoid confrontation, the deeper the rot. Resentment turns you into a spectator of your own life. You watch things happen to you. You justify the abuse. You wear your suffering like a badge. But it's not nobility. It's self-betrayal. Every time you hold back the truth you long to speak, you're feeding that poison. You're reinforcing the very morality that keeps you enslaved. Nietzsche didn't believe that suffering was evil. He believed that untransformed suffering, especially the kind born from cowardice, is dangerous. Resentment is untransformed pain. And if you don't learn to confront what causes it, it will define you. It will dictate your choices. It will turn your life into a quiet tragedy, where you smile on the outside while drowning on the inside. And worst of all, you'll begin to mistake that numbness for maturity. So ask yourself, how much of your silence has been virtue, and how much of it has been fear pretending to be wisdom? You've been told your whole life that wanting power is dangerous, that it's selfish, that it leads to corruption. But Nietzsche had a different view, one that challenges everything you've been taught. He believed that the desire for power isn't evil. It's natural, vital, divine. Not power over others, but the power to become. The will to power, he called it. The inner drive to express yourself fully, to shape your life, to impose meaning on the chaos. It's not about domination. It's about liberation. The will to rise above what you've been told you must be. But slave morality suffocates this instinct. It tells you to hide, to conform, to stay small, quiet, obedient. It teaches you that being assertive is aggressive, that setting boundaries is rude, that wanting more is dangerous. And so, your will to power, the very engine of your becoming, gets buried under guilt. You hesitate when you should act. You apologize for existing. You reject your own desires before anyone else can. That's not humility. That's self-erasure. And Nietzsche saw it as a tragedy, a denial of life itself. To reclaim your strength, you must first stop demonizing it. Start by noticing every time you flinch at your own assertiveness, every time you talk yourself out of saying no, every time you feel guilty for simply existing as you are. These are the moments where slave morality wins. These are the battlegrounds where your will to power must rise. Small acts of defiance, speaking your truth, defending your space, asking for what you need. These are not ego trips. They are revolutions. They are sacred. The will to power is not loud or cruel. It's not about overpowering. It's about refusing to be overpowered. It's a quiet fire, a sacred refusal to disappear. And the more you practice honoring it, the more alive you become. This is the opposite of resentment. This is transformation. This is strength that doesn't need to disguise itself as virtue. It simply is. Not a reaction to the world, but a creation of one's own. So ask yourself, when was the last time you chose to stand tall? Not out of anger, not to prove anything, but because you finally remembered who you were. Nietzsche didn't just tear down illusions. He offered a map, a vision of what it takes to become free. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he describes the journey of the human spirit through 3 symbolic transformations, from camel to lion to child. These aren't just poetic images. They're stages of awakening. And if you've been living under the weight of fear, resentment, and silence, this is the path back to your true self. But first, you must face the camel inside you. The camel is the spirit that says yes to everything. It bows to expectation. It carries burdens it never chose. It's obedient, dutiful, good. It swallows its pain, believing that suffering is noble. It doesn't resist. It endures. Maybe you recognize this in yourself. The pride in being the one who never complains, the one who holds everything together, the one who keeps quiet to keep peace. But Nietzsche saw this as a dead end, a life of quiet resignation, masquerading as strength. The camel doesn't live, it survives. But then something shifts. The camel collapses under the weight of its lies. A fire ignites, and the spirit becomes a lion. The lion roars, no. No to guilt. No to blind obedience. No to inherited values that suffocate the soul. This is the stage of defiance, where you begin to fight for your space in the world. You face the dragon Nietzsche calls "thou shalt," a beast made of all the rules, dogmas, and expectations you've been taught. The lion doesn't destroy for pleasure. It fights to reclaim its right to exist. But that's not the final stage, because rebellion alone is still reaction. It's still bound to the old world. The final metamorphosis is the child, the most misunderstood, yet the most divine. The child is not naive. It is free. It no longer carries burdens, no longer fights shadows. The child creates. It lives from its own center. It invents values, dances with chaos, and says a sacred yes to life. This is the stage where conflict is no longer a threat. It's a playground for authenticity. You don't assert yourself to destroy. You assert yourself to express, to live fully, lightly, truly. So ask yourself, where are you on this path? Are you still the camel? Have you become the lion? Or are you ready, finally, to be reborn? Become who you are. That was Nietzsche's challenge. Not a slogan, but a battle cry. He wasn't talking about self-discovery in the shallow, comfortable sense. He meant something harder, something dangerous. Becoming who you are is not about finding your identity. It's about forging it. And the forge is fire. It's struggle. It's conflict. Your true self doesn't appear when you're relaxed and accepted. It emerges when you stand up, alone, and say something that risks rejection. That's when you see what you're made of. That's when you stop performing and start becoming. Think of your life. How much of it have you lived for others? How often have you said yes when everything in you screamed no? How many of your decisions were shaped by fear? Fear of disappointing, of offending, of losing love. This isn't selfhood. It's adaptation. It's playing roles to survive in a world that punishes difference. But Nietzsche shows us the price. Every time you betray your truth to maintain peace, a piece of you dies. You become a collection of masks, a ghost of potential. And yet, the doorway to freedom is always there. Conflict. Not random aggression, but necessary confrontation. Saying the uncomfortable thing. Setting the boundary. Refusing to apologize for your existence. This is where your identity begins to crystallize. Not in conformity, but in resistance. Not in comfort, but in courage. The self is not found. It's built. And each act of authentic defiance lays another brick. But don't be deceived. This path is lonely. It strips away the applause, the approval, the illusion of safety. And that's the point. Because only when you stop needing to be liked, do you start becoming real. Nietzsche didn't offer peace. He offered power. Not power over others, but the power to stop abandoning yourself. To say what must be said. To live a life that doesn't shrink in the face of discomfort. Becoming who you are requires risk. It demands sacrifice. And it starts the moment you decide that being true is more important than being accepted. So ask yourself right now, when the next confrontation rises, will you once again disappear into silence? Or will you finally step forward into yourself? You've been taught to believe that silence is a form of wisdom, that walking away is strength. that not engaging is morally superior. But let's be honest, how often is your silence actually peace, and how often is it fear? How many times have you swallowed offenses, endured humiliation, tolerated disrespect, not because you were transcending conflict, but because you were terrified of it? Nietzsche forces us to face a brutal truth. When you remain silent in the face of injustice, you are not virtuous. You are complicit. Every time you stay quiet when you should speak, you reinforce the very structures that hurt you. You validate behavior that should be challenged. You teach people how to treat you, not by your words, but by your silence. And the more you do it, the deeper the damage. You begin to forget what it even feels like to defend yourself. You lose your voice, then your confidence, then your sense of self. What started as avoidance becomes erasure. This is not peace, it's paralysis, and the world sees it. Those who exploit others sense weakness like blood in the water. The more agreeable you become, the more invisible you are. The more tolerant you become, the more abuse you invite. Not because you deserve it, but because silence tells them they can. Nietzsche understood this clearly. A morality that praises silence in the face of wrongdoing is not moral. It's decayed. It teaches you to keep your head down while the world burns around you. It tells you that to be good is to be harmless. But the truth is, real goodness often looks like confrontation. Real courage often looks like discomfort. You were not made to live quietly in the margins of your own life. You were not born to be agreeable, invisible, polite to the point of vanishing. You were made to speak, to draw lines, to challenge what diminishes you. Every time you do, even trembling, you reclaim a piece of yourself. But this takes a choice, a decision to stop mistaking silence for virtue, a decision to stop participating in your own oppression. So ask yourself one last time, is your silence protecting your peace or destroying your power? You've made it this far, and that says something about your hunger for truth, your discomfort with comfort, your refusal to keep pretending everything is fine. Maybe today, something cracked open. Maybe you saw yourself in the camel, kneeling under burdens you never chose. Maybe you recognized the quiet venom of resentment, the fear masquerading as virtue, and maybe, just maybe, you heard the lion stir inside you. That voice that says, "No more." Nietzsche never promised ease. He promised transformation. And transformation begins in fire, in conflict, in shedding the false self you built to survive. This isn't about fighting everyone. It's about no longer abandoning yourself. It's about becoming who you are, not as an idea, but as a force, a presence, a truth no longer willing to stay silent. You don't need permission to exist loudly. You don't need approval to speak. You need only one thing, the will to stop waiting. So if this message resonated with something raw and real in you, don't let it fade. Declare it, out loud, in the comments, in your life. Say the words, "I choose to no longer remain silent." Let that be your first act of power. And when the next conflict comes, because it will, don't run. Stand. Speak. Begin the beautiful, terrifying work of becoming yourself. Because there's nothing more dangerous or more divine